Welcome to the Forge, my wanton wildlings. I'm your creepsmith, and I hope you like my work. Tonight's repulsive reading, The Gristers, author unknown. Okay, X, or whatever creepy board this makes its way onto. I put this here because I thought it would get to the most people to whom it was relevant. If you are one of those people, those ones inherently drawn to horror, you're in real danger. I don't know exactly what it was, or pretend to know everything about what's going on. In fact, I myself used to be drawn to those more realistic, non-supernatural creepypastas. But, okay, let me explain. About a year ago, I was up at 3 a.m. You know, that part of the night where you're so deep into it, it feels like it'll never end. Anyway, I'm up, clicking around looking for a good pasta that I hadn't read before, getting myself really freaked out. You know the feeling. I'm sure you do. You like that feeling. That's the problem. Anyway, I'm reading, and I hear this pattering sound coming from the kitchen. Now, I had a cat, so I just assumed that it was her. But then I glance at my bed, and my cat is sitting on it. See, I've been freaking myself out for a while here, so I was nearly trembling with fear as I opened my bedroom door. I live alone in a single bedroom apartment with just a bedroom, a kitchen, a living room, and a bathroom. My bedroom door opens up into the kitchen. It's pitch black, the moonlight is gleaming off the linoleum, and I'm straining my ears and listening. Didn't hear a thing. So, I admonish myself for being such a fucking pussy. It's just random house noises, right? Or maybe a mouse in the wall. I was about to turn around and head back into my room when I hear it again. And I see something skitter across the linoleum in the kitchen, heading for the bathroom. Now, it's small, but it definitely wasn't a rat. The limbs were way too long. The torso was far too high off the ground, and the way it moved, it was quick, but so awkward. In any other circumstances, I might have laughed at it. As it was, I was scared shitless. So, I basically freeze for like 10 minutes. It was the size of the thing that convinced me to move. See, no matter how weird or fucked up it was so much smaller than me, it couldn't have been that dangerous, right? So I pop open the bathroom door. Before I turn on the light, I do a quick scan. Nothing. I flick the switch. I look around. Still nothing. I even looked on the ceiling. I threw the shower curtain open. Still nothing. What could it have been? My mind started inventing explanations. It definitely had 4 limbs. Maybe it was a big-ass spider who had lost 4 of its legs somehow. That could explain the awkward movement. It was good enough for me. I was about to go back to bed when I thought on a whim to use my broom to poke behind the toilet, between the wall and the base of the seat. When I did, I hit something solid and it scurried out. It looked like a tiny human. It was pale white, pale as a maggot, with dirty gray streaks running along the skin. It moved on all 4s with long, thin fingers that grasped the ground. Its skull was completely bald. It had no eyes, and the skin looked like it had been torn away from the lower half of its face, leaving the exposed teeth and the gums. It looked up at me, it pointed its face in my general direction anyway, and then scurried quick as fuck up the side of the bath and down into the drain. Into the drain. It moved in quick bursts, like a spider, and it climbed straight up smooth surfaces like one too. After it disappeared down the drain, I just stood there, frozen, broom handle still in my hand, for what must have been a good 5 minutes. I was scared shitless. I slowly backed out of the bathroom and closed the door. Then I stuffed a blanket in the crack between the floor and the door, fearing that it might come out. Then I sat in my bed and I wondered what I could do. I mean, it wasn't like I could call the police. I couldn't tell my friends. It's not like they'd believe me. So, what did I do? I make this thread on X. Now, this was quite a while ago, almost a year. You might not even remember it. Wasn't anything special, and it didn't even get that many responses before falling off the boards. I guess people thought I was joking, which really I would have thought the same thing. My thread in retrospect sounds exactly like the kind of threads I hate. But besides all the OP is a fag and sage responses, there was one other one. I've seen them too, man. Email me. Along with an email address that I'm not going to give out here. So I email this kid, right? Right away he responds and we start up a conversation in IRC. He introduces himself as John, basically tells me a very similar story. One night a few months ago, reading creepypasta, heard a noise, got up, saw a small pale man. His was a bit bigger. He said it was the size of a cat. But he also told me one other thing. He said that I'd be seeing more of them. He said that ever since he saw that first one, he's been seeing more and more of them out everywhere, even in the street during the day. They were everywhere, he said, and once you noticed that first one, it got a lot easier to see all of the others. He had no idea what they were, and he hadn't figured out their behavior yet. He said that usually when he saw them or heard them in his own home, he was reading creepypastas, horror stories. So they usually freaked him out something awful. But he said again, he'd never actually seen them do anything terrible, just scurry out of sight. But he said some got pretty big and not all of them looked the same. I still didn't sleep that night. Over the next week and those that followed, I found that I did get a little bit more accustomed to them. I did see more of them. I'd glimpse them even out of the corner of my eye, or see the retreating rear end of one crawling out a gutter pipe, or see their tiny faces staring out at the street from the sewers. Some, it seemed, weren't even trying to hide. Now, I lived in Providence, Rhode Island, which is a small city. On my way to work one day, I take the bus. I was looking out the window and saw a pretty large one, like large as a medium-sized dog, trotting along the sidewalk. People were just walking by it. Actually, I think that a lot of people did see it as a dog. One man stopped and actually scratched its head. I'd always email John and tell him about the appearances of them when I saw him. I'd even try to catch some on camera, but they always heard the whirring from the lens and darted away before my camera could take a picture. I told myself that I'd eventually have to take a picture of one of the bigger, slower ones. But either way, as the weeks wore on, I became more and more used to them. I mean, sure, they were creepy as shit, and I could never sit down on the toilet and enjoy a long crap anymore because I was paranoid that they'd climb up the bowl and bite me on the ass. But they weren't really doing anything harmful. They unnerved the fuck out of me, but so did big spiders. I could live with them. John called them the Gristers, because he said they reminded him of the Grister meme on X for some reason. I'm pretty sure that he meant the grifter meme. But the name Grister stuck. I continued my exchanges with John, but I noticed that he was becoming more and more tense. It was really hard to tell over the text, but really that was the only way to put it. I just figured that the novelty of a shared experience had worn off. We didn't really have that much to talk about otherwise. John, he wasn't really my type of person. He was a steroid-pumping bodybuilder in southern Florida who lived with his mom. But we started discussing Grister behavior, and he said that his were starting to act a bit more differently than the ones that I saw. He'd wake up at night and they'd be perched on the end of his bed, staring at them with those eyeless faces. They wouldn't scurry away anymore. He said that he woke up one time because one of them had actually started touching his face. That sounded unnerving. This whole time, I'd been putting out inquiries on the internet to see if anyone else had experienced this phenomenon. I couldn't be the only one, could I? But no one came forward. On X, most of my threads about the subject got saged, and so eventually I stopped asking. But I have an inquisitive mind. I wanted to know what these things did, what exactly they were. I even thought about capturing one. I left out food and mousetraps, but none of the things ever went for it. My cat would notice them, though. She'd hiss at him and even chased a couple of them. All those times that I'd seen her do that and assumed she was being a dumbass cat, chasing at nothing. Shows what I know. One night I was walking home from work alone. I work at a call center for a police charity, and my house is about 6 miles away from the office. I'd had to stay late, so there was no bus to come pick me up, and I really didn't have all that many friends, so walking it was. Anyway, I was walking past some old abandoned brick house. Creepy shit, let me tell you. When I heard some weird, low groan. That's when I happened to notice that there were a lot more Gristers than usual here. They were mostly ignoring me, but they were scurrying in and around one particular brick house. The groaning sounds seemed to be coming from the alley beside it. Now, a lot of Gristers were creepy enough, even without that low groaning noise. What made me decide to investigate? I don't know. Morbid curiosity, maybe. I'm always looking for creepy or gory stuff to post on boards. I thought that maybe the groaning was some kind of wounded animal. So I approached the side of the house, noting that the windows were boarded up. That groaning, I should have known that it wasn't an animal. It was a low, creaking, gurgling sound. It didn't sound like any fucking animal that I knew. So I snuck down the alley, and when I saw what was making the noise, I nearly pissed myself. It was a fat, humongous Grister, at least 8 feet wide, completely unable to move, with rolls of fat hanging down over its legs. It had no neck, just 14 chins leading up to that macabre exposed jaw. Dirty drool ran down its chins to cover that obscenely huge belly, and smaller Gristers crawled in and out of the rolls of its fat. It was rubbing itself with this pudgy claw, making that groaning, gurgling sound, which sounded almost sexual. It was terrible. I know it doesn't sound like it, and objectively I can think that a fat cooing Grister rubbing itself might sound pretty funny, actually. But in the presence of the thing, all I felt was this sick revulsion and disgust. But I kept in mind one thing, that I'd been looking for a picture of these things, so I bust out my camera phone and I snap a picture. I wish I hadn't. If I hadn't, I think maybe I could have lasted a little longer. The second I snap that picture, the thing stops groaning and swivels its head toward me. All of them did, in fact. They all started hissing and screaming at me, this horrible fucking sound like rusty nails on a chalkboard. I was thoroughly freaked out. To put things mildly, I lost my shit. I ran out of there as fast as I could, ran all the way home. Gristers didn't seem so harmless to me now. That noise they'd made was straight out of hell. I didn't feel safe with the lights off anymore. I've flipped all my lights on, scaring the shit out of my napping cat. I slammed the bedroom door shut and stuffed a blanket around the cracks again. I just sat down on my bed and looked at the picture I'd taken. There it was, clear as day, that huge Grister. I mean, Just looking at it made me feel sick. So of course I was going to post it on X. I loaded onto my computer and sent an email to John with the subject, "Will you look at this, fat fuck?" Then I immediately came to X and began typing up my thread, explaining myself, explaining the Gristers, explaining the photograph. I was just getting ready to post when John sent me a message. "Yo, don't show that shit to anyone." I stopped. I replied to John, asking what the hell he was talking about. He told me. He said that he thought he'd figured out what was making the Gristers around him more hostile. He said that he'd thought when they figured out you could see them, they started getting more aggressive. He showed me the scratches he had all down his arm from them clawing at him at night. He said that he'd seen a lot more of the bigger ones hanging around his house. They'd watch him through his windows. They knew that he could see them, and they didn't like it. I was pretty sure they knew I could see them too. So what did I do? In the end, I didn't post the picture. I wasn't too intimidated, but it probably saved a lot of you. I didn't want to trigger anyone else into being able to see these guys if it had dangerous consequences down the road. I didn't notice any behavior changes right away. For a while, in fact, for about 2 weeks, the Gristers acted just the same way they had before. I was beginning to think that John's problem was his own thing and that the Gristers didn't know or didn't care that I could see them. And then things started happening so fast. I woke up one night and there were 4 of them just perched around my bed, staring at me. I freaked the fuck out and swept them away. And they just hissed that terrible noise at me and ran. I emailed this to John, who I hadn't talked to otherwise. He didn't respond. We hadn't talked since I told him about the picture, and even rarely before that. After 2 days, during which the Gristers began touching me in my sleep, I got an answer. John was dead. His brother had the password to his email and was letting all his internet acquaintances know. He'd committed suicide, sliced open his wrists in the bathtub. That didn't strike me as genuine. John didn't seem like the type to commit suicide to me. Had things with the Gristers really gotten that bad that they drove him to that? We didn't really know each other very well, but he hadn't mentioned anything like this to me. His brother said that he hadn't left a note. So, of course, I gave him my condolences, and that was that. Now, I had no one to talk about this to. I started looking online for more references or just anything. All the while, the little bastards were getting more and more aggressive. I'd look over my shoulder and there'd be 1 or 2 on the windowsill just staring at me. One time I opened the door to my apartment, I live on the 3rd floor, and there was one about the size of a large dog staggering around the bottom of the stairwell, pale face flashing in and out of the darkness, baring its teeth in a growl at me, pale limbs flashing as it bounded up the stairs. I slammed the door shut. I didn't go to work that day. Then I saw it on the news. That house that I'd seen that fat-ass Grister at, I would have skipped right past the story had I not seen the picture of that house. The article was entitled, 8 Found Dead, 3 Alive in Rape Dungeon Raid. Apparently some sick fuck had been using the basement of one of those abandoned houses as a place to keep women prisoner and kill them when they felt like it. It was a terrible story, but one of the things one of the survivors said really struck me. We were just so terrified all the time. We never knew when he was going to come in and decide to kill one of us. When he was going to really hurt us while raping us. We were just so terrified all the time. And then it hit. Terrified all the time. And Gristers had been all over the place. When I first saw one, I'd been reading creepypastas. Pretty freaked out. Same for John. Were these things drawn to fear? Then I read that 2 of the survivors were being sent to a mental hospital for hallucinations. Had they seen the Gristers? After that occurred to me, I stopped sleeping. I didn't want to wake up to those things staring at me. I stopped eating, too. Whenever I wasn't at work, which was more and more often, as I called out many times when I saw Gristers bigger than a cat sniffing around my building for me, I was locked in my room, trying to hunt for information on the internet about these things. I just couldn't find anyone who'd actually seen them. The Gristers, on the other hand, were getting more violent. They were starting to scratch me and bite me in those few scant hours that I actually did nod off to sleep. I'd always freak out and sweep them away, and they'd just hiss at me. After about a week of this, I came home from work and I found my cat dead. They had peeled all the skin away from her skull, giving her a look of shock. I quit my job. I cried for days. X, I don't have many friends, and I really loved that cat. They're not stupid, guys. They don't talk and they act differently from us, but they do have intelligence. I went out for food last week. It was the last time I'll ever go out. I was sitting at the downtown bus station, shivering, looking all around me for the Gristers when the bus approached. I got up to get on. And out of nowhere, a Grister, the size of a normal human, just bent over and, walking their weird loping gait, slammed into the back of a woman next to me and threw her down in front of the bus. She had no chance. I saw her slide under the wheels. I saw her blood and ruined organs squeezed out of her mouth like toothpaste. Everyone freaked out in panic. As people rushed to aid her, the Grister turned toward me and grinned. I dropped my groceries and screamed, running back to my house, sobbing the whole way. They're toying with me. And that's when I realized, finally, why there wasn't anyone I could really talk to about them. Think about it, guys. How many times when people commit suicide do you hear it reported that they were suffering from hallucinations? You read the reports of people who have been in terrible, frightening situations like that rape dungeon or like a war. How many of them suffer from hallucinations? Sure, a lot of them are actual hallucinations, but some of them are the Gristers. And eventually, they figure out that you can see them, and they start fucking with you. I don't think that everyone they kill is driven to suicide. I don't think John even committed suicide. I think they're smart. I think they know how to make something look like a suicide. You'll hear about it sometimes. You'll read a report about how someone committed suicide, but something just isn't quite right about it. Like a man who went out and bought a new couch and then cut his wrists sitting on it. And guys, I'm convinced that there was nothing special about John or myself. I don't think there's anything special about anyone who sees these things. I think you're just more likely to see them when you're really scared, since that's when they're drawn to you. I can hear them now. It's about 3 a.m. Sounds like there's a really big one outside my apartment door. It sounds like it's trying to gnaw and scratch through the wood. So I'm taking the easy way out. I'd rather have a nice, sharp knife slice my arms open than have my skin torn by those teeth. So, please, this is my warning to you. Stop reading those creepypastas. I know you love it. I know that you love frightening yourself, but you've got to stop. Every time you read it, every time you get that feeling of dread in your stomach, you are drawing them to you. And if you don't stop reading, at least, please, never check out those sounds in the house when you do. Well, I guess this is one of those times where that old saw of show don't tell isn't exactly the best advice if you want your audience to survive. Stay scary, my wildlings, and make the most of your nights.